Hi everyone. I wanted to take a quick moment before beginning the video to update you on some of my content. A few months ago, I posted a poll about the idea of creating monthly videos about recent cases from that month. A lot of you were interested, but these videos can be difficult to create because there is such limited information available to present such current cases. I was really interested when I heard about Amino's new stories feature because I thought it would give me a chance to post more current information in a shorter format. I've actually partnered with Amino, who is sponsoring this video, to create exclusive stories featuring very current cases and breaking news. If you would like to check out my content on Amino, click the link in the description or search for Amino apps to download Amino. My username on Amino is the same as it is on YouTube, so you can find my stories by searching for heavy case files. Make sure to follow me and click the bell to receive notifications when I post a new story. Thank you for your support. Wednesdays were always hectic at the offices of The Spectator. The weekly newspaper in Joliet, Illinois had to have its newest edition ready by Wednesday night so that it could go to press on Thursday morning. On Wednesday, September 25th, 1957, Molly Zelko arrived at the paper's offices at 7 a.m. and would end up working an almost 17-hour day, which was only slightly longer than her usual day at the office. Molly's role at the paper was somewhat hard to define. She had started out as the paper's secretary-treasurer, more concerned with the business side of running a newspaper, but over the past 21 years, she had taken over more and more responsibilities in different aspects of producing the paper. She frequently wrote articles for the paper and spent a lot of time investigating stories. Nothing made it into The Spectator without Molly approving of it, and she demanded perfection in the proofs she was presented with. After a long day spent talking on her private phone line and examining and approving page proofs for the new issue of the paper, Molly finally left the office at 11:27 p.m. Molly had finished almost all of that week's issue of the paper before she left the office. All she had left to complete was the front page, which she planned to handle first thing in the morning when she arrived back at the office at 6 a.m. Instead, Molly herself would end up being the new issue's front page headline. At 5:15 a.m. the following morning, two printers arrived at the Spectator office and called Molly to wake her up, as they usually did on Thursdays. She did not answer the phone. When she did not arrive at the office by 6 as she normally did to get the paper ready to print, they drove to her home on Buell Avenue, just a 3-minute drive away. When they arrived, Molly's black 1955 Chrysler was parked in front of the apartment. Her car keys were under the seat, where she typically left them. One of the shoes Molly had been wearing the night before was on the trunk of the car, and the other was found in the grass nearby. The printers called other staff members and two of Molly's siblings. The group got a locksmith to come out and let them into Molly's apartment on the second floor. There was no sign of Molly inside. It did not appear that her bed had been slept in the night before, and the jewelry she had been wearing the previous day was not found inside the apartment. The police were called. The investigation quickly turned up a few clues. Neighbors reported hearing muffled screams, as well as the sound of a car speeding down the street sometime around midnight. They all had attributed the noises to rambunctious teenagers. The shoe had been on the trunk of the car because a man walking down the street at 12:15 a.m. had seen it on the ground and picked it up and placed it there so that its owner would find it. Based on the times of these two accounts, whatever happened to Molly had happened very quickly. Molly had previously told friends and family members that if anyone ever came after her, she would take off her shoes and try to run, leaving the shoes behind as a sign that something had happened to her. While it seems unlikely that Molly would have had time to take off her shoes while trying to flee an attacker, Molly did habitually drive without her shoes on. If she had been attacked as soon as she got out of her car, she would not have had her shoes on, and could have thrown them on the ground to leave as a clue. Molly's disappearance became a major news story, in part because her coworkers at the newspaper made it so. Reporters from across the Midwest traveled to Joliet to cover the case as well. The air and ground search for Molly spanned 5 counties. Local motorcycle riders and hot rod drivers searched the back roads of Joliet. Waterways were also searched. Despite the media coverage and the thorough searches, Molly Zelko remained missing. Molly had been born on May 9, 1910, in Joliet. Both of her parents were Slovenian immigrants. and when her father Frank became a United States citizen a year before her birth, he had altered the spelling of the family's surname to make it seem less foreign to native-born Americans, as many immigrants did at the time. Molly's first name was Americanized as well. Her legal name, as it appears on her birth certificate, was Amelia. She would, as an adult, sign her name to official documents like her will and passport, as it appeared on her birth certificate, but she publicly used the more common name Amelia. However, her full first name rarely mattered, as most people called Amelia by her preferred nickname, Molly. At the age of 17, Molly had gotten a job as a secretary at the law practice of William McCabe. McCabe would be a fixture in Molly's professional career, and she would remain fiercely loyal to him. The 42-year-old was a lawyer by the time he hired Molly, but he had started out his career as a reporter in 1903 and had worked for several newspapers. McCabe was also heavily involved in politics. He had served 6 terms as an Illinois state representative, and then as the mayor of Lockport, Illinois, for 2 years. In 1932, he was elected Will County State's attorney, and made Molly his office manager. In June of 1936, McCabe decided to get back into the newspaper business after he lost his bid for re-election as state's attorney. He bought the Spectator, a weekly newspaper in Joliet. That December, he made a deal with Molly. He offered her the position of secretary-treasurer of the Spectator, a position which would pay her $20 a week. Her main responsibility would be to ensure the paper's finances were built on a solid foundation. If she achieved this goal, she would be given 33 shares of Spectator stock. Molly received these shares at the beginning of 1945. On April 7, 1948, William McCabe, who was again running for public office, was beaten with baseball bats and left for dead along a rural road by 4 attackers. He was not found for several hours. While he survived the attack, he was plagued by pain and health problems for the remainder of his life. This left him unable to be as active in the day-to-day operations of the Spectator. With McCabe out of the office much more frequently due to his injuries, Molly took on more and more of the responsibilities of the newspaper. While Molly had been a major part of the Spectator, it was at this point that she became the main driving force behind it. Molly received 15 more shares of stock in the paper in December of 1951. In 1953, she and William McCabe established a trust agreement. They each held 48 shares of stock in the Spectator, and gave 3 additional shares to State's Attorney Frank Masters to hold in trust. In the event that either Molly or William passed away, Masters was to sign the 3 shares over to the surviving member of the agreement, which would give them controlling interest in the paper. Given William McCabe's advanced age and poor health, he was expected to pass away long before Molly, making the trust agreement essentially his way of making Molly Zelko his heir apparent as far as the Spectator was concerned. The attack on McCabe resulted in Molly being much more involved at the paper, and it also resulted in Molly getting involved in investigations that made a lot of dangerous people unhappy. Molly believed that her longtime employer and business partner had been attacked by members of a local crime syndicate. Joliet was plagued at the time by political corruption and organized crime. Just before McCabe was attacked, the Spectator had run several articles about the illegal gambling operations the syndicate operated in the area. Molly believed that McCabe had been targeted because of the attention he had brought to the illicit operation, and not for political motives. Molly would use the Spectator to voice her opposition to corruption and organized crime right up until her disappearance. She publicly denounced the minor punishment Joliet's mayor received for failing to pay taxes on kickbacks he had received. She figured out how to record phone calls and had several contractors fixing bids on city projects on tape. She banned the wife of suspected gang leader Francis "the Thin Man" Curry from the paper's society pages and would copy down license plate numbers from cars parked outside the Curry home while they were having parties. She reported heavily on local illegal gambling activities and the failure of police to shut them down. Gambling and its ties to organized crime dominated much of Molly's work at The Spectator just prior to her disappearance. Francis Curry's organization controlled the distribution and operation of pinball machines in Joliet. A Supreme Court ruling had also just declared that pinball machines were to be considered gambling devices. Molly therefore wrote editorials supporting city council candidates who wanted to ban the machines in Joliet, as well as the legislation itself. The city council voted to ban pinball machines in August of 1957, with the ordinance going into effect the following January. That same month, Molly focused in on an illegal gambling establishment operating out of an area warehouse, sending reporters and a photographer to investigate it. The attention resulted in the establishment having to close down. It reopened 2 weeks after Molly went missing. In short, there was not a shortage of dangerous people who would have been happy to see Molly Zelko disappear. While Molly publicly showed no fear in her writing, refusing to back down in her coverage of corruption and crime, she did often fear for her safety. She frequently suspected that she was being followed, and once called one of her brothers because she thought someone was waiting to attack her in the parking lot outside of the Spectator offices. He drove over and sat in his car in the parking lot with a shotgun to watch her as she walked to her car, in case she had been right. Molly's office window had also previously been shot at. However, a mob-related abduction or politically driven crime is not the only possible scenario in Molly's case. It has been considered that Molly may have voluntarily disappeared and left her shoes outside her apartment to make it appear as though she had been abducted. Molly normally had the press room foreman follow her on the short drive home when she left work late at night. On the night she went missing, she did not ask him to, which further added to the speculation that she had left on her own accord. Given the concerns she had about her safety, it would not have been unreasonable for her to leave town and start a new life, as her own personal version of the Witness Protection Program. After Molly's disappearance began receiving publicity, numerous possible sightings of her were reported around the country. By the summer of 1958, FBI offices in a dozen cities across the country had followed up on alleged sightings of Molly. None of these sightings were ever substantiated. Molly was also allegedly spotted overseas, but her passport had expired in 1953, and she had never applied for a new one. It was also suggested, after Molly disappeared, that she had less than honorable reasons for wanting to leave Joliet. Molly did own several luxury items, like mink coats and expensive jewelry, that seemed too expensive for someone with Molly's salary to purchase. When she went missing, she was wearing a diamond ring and a bracelet that was worth $5,000. She also owned a 17.5-carat diamond ring that had reportedly been exhibited at the 1933 World's Fair and was valued at more than $30,000. This led to rumors that Molly had been embezzling money from the Spectator and had run off to live on the stolen money she had hidden in a secret bank account. However, when William McCabe's daughters, who did not like Molly or the amount of influence she had at the Spectator, took over operations at the paper in Molly's absence, their first order of business was to order an audit of the paper's finances, which showed no missing funds or discrepancies. At least some of Molly's expensive jewelry had reasonable explanations. The diamond ring Molly had been wearing the night she disappeared is rumored to be the engagement ring she had been given as a young woman. Her fiancé had been killed in an accident, and Molly never married anyone else. Molly had also only paid $5,000 for the 17.5-carat ring, because she had purchased it from an estate. Molly also only paid $55 a month in rent for her second-floor apartment. She barely furnished it, since she spent so much time at work. This would leave a larger portion of her salary available for discretionary spending. While all of the money she had to spend on expensive items isn't necessarily accounted for, there is no evidence of gross financial misconduct on her part. With local authorities having no luck in finding Molly, her friends and family began putting pressure on the FBI to get involved. One of Molly's brothers organized a petition which received more than 5,000 signatures, imploring the FBI to take up the case. William McCabe wrote J. Edgar Hoover personally, arguing that the FBI's involvement was necessary because of the corruption going on in Joliet and Molly's advocacy against it. Publicly, the FBI refused to take on the case, claiming that there was no actual proof that Molly had been abducted, or that any other federal law had been broken, which would have been necessary for them to have authority to investigate the case. Covertly, however, the FBI did in fact show an interest in Molly's case. They pulled tax returns for Molly and her associates, checked for secret accounts in dozens of banks, and followed up on, and discredited, several reported sightings of Molly. By January of 1958, with no more leads and no evidence that any federal statutes had been violated, the agent in charge of the FBI's office in Chicago wrote to J. Edgar Hoover asking for permission to end the Bureau's investigation. Hoover insisted that the case remain open and would deny all further requests to shut down the investigation for more than a year and a half. Hoover was skeptical of the authorities in Joliet, of the local crime syndicate, of the Zelko family, and of Molly herself. While Hoover believed there were a lot of leads for the Bureau to investigate, none of them located Molly or proved that a federal crime had been committed. Molly's disappearance also caught the attention of future presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy. In 1958, Kennedy was the chief counsel for the Senate Rackets Committee and came across Molly's case while investigating organized crime's involvement in the coin machine industry. Kennedy came to Illinois to interview James Rinney, a mob enforcer serving time in prison for, among other things, threatening a newspaper editor who had been reporting on criminal ties to pinball machines. During his meeting with Kennedy, Rinney confessed to being involved in Molly Zelko's kidnapping and claimed to know where she had been buried. Kennedy and his investigator went to the farm Rinney had identified as the site of the burial and dug for Molly's remains themselves, but found nothing. Rinney later admitted to fabricating the story in hopes that Kennedy could get his sentence reduced. In 1978, reporters Lonnie Kane and John Whiteside published a series of articles re-examining Molly's case. In the course of their investigation, they uncovered two new major witnesses in the case. One of them was a bartender, who may in fact have been the last person to see Molly before she disappeared. According to the bartender, Molly had come into the private club where he worked and had a drink on the night she vanished. She left him a 50-cent tip and asked for $4 in change. She then made at least 2 long-distance phone calls from a phone booth and left. The phone records from that day had long been destroyed by the time Kane and Whiteside heard about this account, so there was no way for them to confirm it or investigate the people Molly had called. The bartender's story does fill in a gap on the timeline of Molly's final night. Her apartment was just a 3-minute drive from her office at the Spectator. Molly left the office at 11:27, and Molly's neighbors heard screams around midnight. If those screams came from Molly as she was being abducted, and she was abducted as she got out of her car to go into her apartment, then there was almost a half hour of time that would be unaccounted for, during which she could have stopped at the club for a drink. The second witness was a woman who insisted that she remain anonymous, and was given the pseudonym Sarah in Kane and Whiteside's coverage of her account. In September of 1957, Sarah lived on Stryker Avenue in Joliet, across the street from a construction site where a storm sewer pipe was being put in. At 1:30 a.m. on September 26th, an hour and a half after Molly Zelko's suspected abduction, she awoke to the sound of a car and got up to see if it was her husband arriving home. It was not. Sarah claimed to have seen 4 men get out of a dark car with Michigan license plates. They took something long and wrapped in a blanket out of the trunk of the car. Sarah then saw a woman's limp leg fall out of the blanket. The men buried the woman in the ditch that had been dug for the pipe before driving off. At least one of these men worked at the construction site, and Sarah saw him bulldozing over the area the following morning. This man was one of many who worked at the site who would come over to Sarah's house to ask for water. When this man came to ask for water that day, he asked Sarah if she had slept well the night before, and she feared that he had seen her witness the burial from her window. Sarah agreed to be hypnotized under the supervision of a doctor. The doctor believed that she was being truthful and that she had experienced a traumatic event the night Molly Zelko went missing. Kane and Whiteside were also able to confirm that there had been a storm sewer pipe construction project on Stryker Avenue in September 1957. The Will County State's Attorney did not find Sarah's statements convincing. Sarah had waited 21 years to come forward and was not an ideal witness. Since Kane and Whiteside cannot reveal her identity, they cannot provide exact details as to why, but they have described her as having personal problems and strange beliefs. An exhumation of the area would have been very difficult and expensive, and as such was never carried out, since it would have been done solely based on Sarah's account. John Whiteside passed away from cancer in 2005 at the age of 61. Lonnie Kane maintains a Facebook page dedicated to Molly's case and is currently working on both a book and an 8-part podcast about her story. Molly's longtime mentor and business partner, William McCabe, died less than a year after she went missing. In 1959, Molly's shares of The Spectator were sold to McCabe's widow Ada for $51,000. The paper's popularity and success began to diminish, and the McCabe family sold it 4 years later. The Spectator went out of business in 1965. Molly Zelko was legally declared dead in 1964.